This programming is sponsored by Central Market, offering more than 70 types of scratch-made breads, buttermilk-based muffins, cookies, cupcakes, patisserie, custom cakes, and more. All baked fresh daily. More at centralmarket.com.
This is the Engines of Our Ingenuity, made possible by the Friends of KUHF Houston.
Today, farming comes to Europe. The University of Houston's College of Engineering presents this series about the machines that make our civilization run and the people whose ingenuity created them. In fall 1974, my family and I walked a trail on the plateau above the Serbian side of the Danube. It was rainy and verdant. Small farms broke into the forest here and there. The compact and efficient style of farming seemed as old as the river itself. I didn't realize that day above the Danube that these were the very first northern European farmlands. Peter Bugocki tells how agriculture passed through this gate on its way into Europe. Farming first arose in the Middle East some 9,000 years ago. The Greeks were farming 500 years later. From there, the technology of farming split into two forms. One was temperate zone farming. It reached Italy 7,800 years ago and found its way into Spain and France 7,400 years back. That migration, it turns out, took place by sea. Our Stone Age ancestors were accomplished sailors and traders before they learned to farm. But farming spread even more rapidly up the Greek peninsula through Macedonia to the Danube. For 8,000 years people had been farming the plateau I walked that day. At first farming settled into the plains of Serbia and Hungary. Much of this movement appears to have been colonization. Farming reached Central Europe 7,400 years ago, but it didn't get to England and Scandinavia until 1,600 years later. You can trace that migration in two technologies that followed it. One was the livestock that came out of Turkey and went with the farmers: sheep, goats, cows, and pigs. Even today, diets in that part of the world are rich in roast lamb, beef, and pork. The other marker was the so-called linear pottery culture that came out of Hungary some 7,600 years ago. Throughout the migration, people decorated their pots with scribed lines in the clay. Their farming had to differ radically from that in the dry Mediterranean countries. Mediterranean farmers broke their brittle soil with a stick plow that simply fractured it. Northern farmers had to turn furrows with a much heavier plow. Our word plow comes from an old Slavic word, pflug. Not long ago we discovered the preserved body of a man from one of those farming communities frozen into the Tyrolean Alps, the so-called Iceman. As we study him, it becomes clear he lived a civilized life. He lived in a house, had some of the first copper implements in that world, and was probably on a trading mission. I often go back to that rainy day in 1974, to smells of apples, straw, manure, to the ancient quiet of a peaceful people once living there, to a straw-roofed peasant hut, to the sense that if I'd suddenly been shifted back 8,000 years, things wouldn't have seemed so different. As I relive that day, I feel my kinship with people who once moved their modest herds into Europe and began forming the world we know today. I'm John Lienhard at the University of Houston, where we're interested in the way inventive minds work.